Hi, I'm Chuck Dorsett for Weaver Leather Supply, and we're going to have a great time making a simple yet useful and gorgeous project. Now, Hot Matt, if your thought was anything like mine, not really at the top of my project list. Well, actually, unlimited creative possibilities right here. But also, if you're new to leather or you want to step into hand sewing, this is the perfect project. But also, great gift idea. All right, anything I use in this video, weaverleathersupply.com, or check below. We've got links there. Going to take you straight to our website. But also, if you like our videos, hit your notifications. You'll know exactly when we release these. All right, so at this point, how about more Matt, less chat? Let's look at our pattern. The two best things about this project. First off, it's a simple, fun project. So great gift idea. But secondly, unlimited possibilities with creativity. We'll talk a little bit about that, but we're just going to scratch the surface. So for the most part, we've got a digital pick. We'll look at that very shortly, but let's get a feel for the pattern. So we've got our main body, we've got our inset panel, and our third piece is simply a stitch guide. That'll give us a guide to drop in our chisel line. On our strap, what I'm going to do is I'm going to clip both ends of that. So when we bring that around, we basically make a corner. And I'm going to drop that in right up under my inset panel, and that will simply sew in. So, very simple project. Let's jump over to our digital pick. Now, these measurements, these are just generic measurements. These seem to work for me, but it's your project, your call. On our main body, 8 inches by 8 inches, or roughly 20 by 20 centimeters. Inset panel, 6.5 by 6.5, or again, 16 by 16 centimeters roughly. Our stitch guide, 5 by 5, or 12.7 by 12.7. On our strap, we're going to go 6 inches long by 5/8 of an inch wide, 1.58 centimeters, and 15.24 centimeters. And let's just clip the ends on that. So, all told, very simple pattern. Now, on the creative side, like I said, we're not even going to scratch the surface here. But our kitchen is silver, gray, black, and white for the most part. So, we're dropping in a gray and a black leather. These make great decorations for our kitchen, but useful as well. We're going to go with our Water Buffalo, and I love this leather for a number of reasons, and we'll talk about that. But right here, we've got the flesh side up, top grain up, and that beautiful white stitch line. We can reverse that. Let's drop our top grain up, flesh side up, and if we have the foil stamp, we can always drop all kinds of initials or messages or names on that. We don't necessarily have to go with round corners. But jumping back over too, we're going with chrome tans here. We could always do veg tan, different color stitch lines, different color dyes, stamping, tooling, different shapes. Yeah, again, unlimited possibilities with creativity, and that's one of the things I love about this project. Okay, we've got a feel for it, so let's step over to our main table and let's cut some leather. The one thing we have to remember when we're cutting this pattern, and I only bring it up because I've done it, this is just a stitch guide. We're not cutting this out, so let's set that aside. Now right here, this is our pattern sheeting. It makes a great pattern material. It's plastic, so it's durable, but it's easy to cut, easy to mark. The leather we're using, this is our Water Buffalo 4 to 5 ounce, and this is one of my favorite hides. For us crafters, very affordable piece of leather. It's a chrome tan, so a 4 to 5 ounce. It's got some body, but it's very supple. It takes a great stitch line, and if that's not enough, it marks well. It's easy to mark. So let's lay in our 3 pieces. Now I've got a straight edge there, but I'm never really sure, so I'm going to come in just a hair. Let's drop that in and say right there. So good use of leather, very little waste. So let's mark these out with our awl. Good, we're marked. Now I would not necessarily mark this because I'm probably going to pull this out of just a piece of scrap. So let's cut here. Now, new blade or sharp blade every time. Each time we start a project, let's try that. But if we do, we're going to get a very even, very smooth cut. Look at that. So I'm going to cut the balance of these out. Good. Now on our round corners, we don't have to go with a round corner, and we don't have a tool, but we can easily cut these. Now we can certainly cut by our pattern. There we go. We're going to get a pretty good round corner. Now if you're not comfortable doing that, let's just make a series of small cuts. There we go. Again, not perfect, but you know what? Looks pretty good. So I'm going to round corner the balance. Good, we've got those cut. Now for our small strap, we're going 5/8 inch wide, so I'm going to mark 5/8 with my knife. That gives me a very accurate mark there. And 5/8, let's trim that off and cut to size. Well, we're cut. That's easy enough. So I'm going to reset here. Let's add some glue. We're going to go top grain up on our inset, but we're going to go flesh side up for our main body. Gives us a nice color and texture contrast. Now, that's going to be a great bond for glue, skive to skive. We can certainly go top grain to top grain because we're just adding glue to hold this in long enough to get our chisel line in. So let's start right here. Let's take our panel, our inset, we're going to flip this over. Let's take our strap, we're going to bend this around. We're going to go top grain up on this. So let's bend this around to a point. There we go. Now with our glue, this is great glue. So I'm going to take some of this and I'm just going to add across the 2 points. Just beyond that will be visible. So let's just keep that glue right there. Good, okay. And I will clean that up shortly. Let's flip this over and I'm going to drop this in on our corner. There we go. We'll get a better look at this. I'm going to press that down. Now this glue's, again, it's a great glue, but it takes a minute for that to set. There we go. I think that's set enough. So yeah, there we go. We're just making a point and we're setting that right in our corner. But I tell you what, let's give that glue just about 4, maybe 5 minutes. Let that set. I think we're set. Very nice. So the next step, we're going to add glue to our inset panel, drop that on. But let's come in a little bit. Again, we're just using our glue to hold this down, but we don't want to press it and have glue come out. We can get rid of that, but let's just keep the glue inside just a little bit. Okay, spread that glue out just a little bit. Let's flip this over and let's lay that in. Now we could always measure this, but it's relatively easy to get that squared and centered. Okay, let's press that down. We're going to give that maybe just a couple of minutes, let that glue set. Our glue is set. Feels good, looks good. Nice project already. So let's take a groover. Now this is going to groove a line in our edge, parallel to our edge. Makes a great guide for sewing. We can always use our awl, and in fact, if we don't have the groover, we can just take our pattern, lay that in. I like to go 1/8 of an inch from my edge for my stitch line, but we can simply lay this in and mark. Now we'll use that on the inside, but let's use our groover on the outside. Well, that looks good. Nice edge decoration, even if we're not going to sew. I use the groover on just about every project. So now let's take our inset panel. Let's lay this in, center as best we can. Now let's use our awl and just mark for our stitch line. All right, there we go, coming together for us. Let's jump over to our punch table at our chisel line. If you're new to leathercraft, here's 2 very big points. First off, we don't need a sewing machine to put in a beautiful stitch line. Now, hand sewing, not nearly as fast as a machine, but it's easy and it's beautiful. Now, we can always sew on our machines. This is done on the Weaver 303. Great machine. And in fact, if you've thought about jumping into industrial machines, that's absolutely the way to go. Now we've got our punch board. We want to make sure this is down, and we've got this on top of our marble. I've got a piece of leather in there just so that this doesn't slide around, but also kind of dampens the noise just a little bit. So we're going to go with a flat chisel. This is about 5 stitches per inch, and it's my favorite chisel. Looks just like a machine stitch. So what we're going to do, let's lay our chisel right in our groove line. There we go. And I'm going to do my best to hit this straight up and down. If it's not perfect, it's not going to be an issue. So let's drop that in. Feel across the bottom. Yeah, I've got some tines there, but let's just go one more hit. There we go. That's going to make it very easy for us to slide 2 needles through that hole at one time. You'll see where we're going with that. So, getting a chisel in is not the hard part. Getting it out is the problem. So let's take our finger and let's just easily rock that back out. There we go. Look how even and clean that stitch line is already. So let's come down to a corner. What I can do is I'm going to put my first tine in the last hole. In fact, that gets me a little too close to that corner. So let's put 2 tines in the last 2 holes. That keeps us consistent. There we go. Now notice, less pressure and my tines went through more easily. Simply less steel moving through the leather. So if you have a hard time with your 6, you can always jump down to a 4. Now with our set, we've got a 2 and a 1. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to tap that. Now I can see where my next chisel hole is to keep my stitch line consistent. I'm going to jump down to my 1. Let's do that again. There we go. And that way we can work around a corner and keep that stitch line nice and consistent. One more. There we go. All right, we're in our straightaway. So now, first tine, last hole, and drop in our groove line. As we get down to our end, I'd like a consistent distance between my last 2 stitch holes. So what we can do is gauge this. First tine, last hole, let's drop in our 6 and our 4. We're actually pretty close. That's going to be a little bit longer than our other stitches. We're never going to see that. But the point here is this. I can contract or stretch my stitch line simply by, I'm going to put my first tine, last hole, but let's just force our chisel just a little bit that way. There we go. And if we do that again, now I bet we're going to come in right perfect. There we go. So let's drop in 2 tines in our pre-existing hole. There we go. Perfectly consistent. But again, at the same time, if that's a little longer than everything else, we'll never see that. So now I'm going to drop in the chisel line on our inside line. We don't have to drop that in, but to me it's a nice look. But also, we could do all kinds of stitch designs in the center of this. Again, unlimited ways we can go here with creativity. So I'm going to start right here and just work my way around on our inner line. Very nice. We are almost done with this project. We're going to step over, drop in our stitch line. But here's a great point. If our kitchen has more of a rustic feel or have some beautiful browns or beige in there, this is going to be a nice addition. All right, so let's sew this together and we are done. We've got a great video on hand sewing, but if you're new to leather or new to sewing, we're going to touch on the high points. So first and foremost, our sewing pony. This simply opens and clamps on our project, but not hard enough to damage it. Now, on our needles, these are our John James number 18 needles, and these are my favorite. They're the smallest of the 3, but this is a hand sewing needle, so we do not have a sharp point. That's a big help to us. On our thread, I like a nice prominent stitch line. It's hand sewn. I want that visible. So I'm going to go with a 0.8 millimeter Ritza. Here's a cool point. We've got some gorgeous colors. We talked about matching our kitchen with our colors. Say we got some color in that kitchen. Let's drop in a different color stitch line. We literally will have a hot mat that matches our kitchen. How unique is that? So on our thread, we're going to need 4 times our length. That's a long piece of thread. Now I'm going to go with 1 piece, but we can always sew 6 inches, tie a knot, and sew some more. The point there is make it easy on yourself. Now, when we go to sew, we're going to do a saddler stitch. First thing I'm going to do is drop in a needle on both ends of my thread. I'm going to take 1 needle and I'm going to go through my first hole. Now let's equalize out the distance on our thread so we know we're right in the middle. There we go. I don't want to get halfway around my project, and notice I've got 4 inches of thread on one side and 4 feet on the other side. It's happened before. So anyway, let's see, we are equalized there. I know, more talking, less paying attention. Second hole, let's take our prominent hand. Now I'm right-handed, but we want to be able to see this. So I'm going to take that needle and I'm going to go through the next hole. Open it up a little bit. I'm going to take the other needle, come through the back. Notice it's opened up, so that needle slides right through. Let's get them about halfway through. We're going to make an X. I'm going to take my thumb and my first finger from the eye up to the point. And now let's pull that through. Good. Okay. Now, what we want to do is I don't want to pull this so hard that my stitch line starts to ripple. But let's give that just enough tension. There we go. Notice I can see that stitch sink down in. So next hole, let's open that up. There we go. Well, that's already starting to look good. Let's get a couple of stitches in, see how that looks. Well, how's that look? Actually, pretty clean, tight, and consistent. And in fact, I noticed right here, that was our start and end point. We had a little extra room there. We'll never see that. Now, this looks tedious. It really isn't. We can sew about 2 inches, maybe 2.5 inches a minute. So all told, this is only going to take about 10 or 12 minutes to sew. But I'm going to sew around all the way back to my starting point. As we get to our end, let's come down. We've got 1 hole left. Now, I want to explain something. I really didn't go into detail. The reason I want to lead with my prominent hand, if we think about it, is because our chisel is going to enter the leather from this side. Therefore, this hole is more funnel shaped. So the needle literally is going to fall into that hole. The hole on the back side, it's going to be a little bit more puckered on the other side of the chisel. That's why I want to open that hole up. Now that second needle is going to slide through easily. But we're on our last hole. So let's just take 1 needle from the front. We're going to draw that through. Let's pull that tight. Now let's flip this around because we're going to tie a square knot. Now we could hide our knot under this edge, but we're not going to be able to do that in here. So we're just going to tie a knot on the back and then run the 2 tails of thread back through the front. So square knot, right over left, circle around. Let's draw that down. Now left over right, circle around, and let's draw that down. That's a good knot. We don't have stress here. This is not going to be pulled off or left or right. So our knot's going to hold nicely. Now we're going to hammer down our stitch line. We'll look at that here in just a minute. But the point is, this knot's going to disappear. Okay, so we've got our knot. Let's come back through from the back on either side of that knot. Good. Let's pull that taut. Now, with our knife, we've got a new blade in this, but we rarely ever use this part of our blade. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull a little bit hard on that thread, but I'm going to pull the thread across the blade. So therefore, I'm not worried about cutting into my leather. There we go. Looks good. So now I'm going to sew the inside line just like the outside. Well, there we go. That looks good. But notice on our stitch line, no back stitch, no double stitch. That is incredibly consistent. I love hand sewing. Let's step over. We've got 1 more step and then we are done. I tend to sew a good bit more veg tan than chromes. The point being the veg has a little more body to it. When I mentioned let's don't add too much tension, you know, when we pull each stitch, I might have added a little too much. Notice how we're kind of bowing up a little bit. Well, that's going to work out over time. It's going to flatten out. But I may, on my next one, back off on that tension a little bit. So, we're going to hammer down our stitch line. Let's say hammer, but really we're going to tap down our stitch line. I love a tack hammer, but if we don't have one, we can always use our mallet. Now, notice right here, that's my striking area. That's where I'm hitting all my tools. So let's hammer down with this point. But what's going to happen here is we're going to close our holes down. we're going to spread out that stitch line. It's going to be a little more prominent. And if we were actually using a deeper groove line, that stitch would sink down into that groove line, thus reducing the risk of it snagging or grabbing. So let's just take our mallet and let's lightly hammer our stitch line down. Yeah, there we go. We can definitely see a difference there. So I'm going to work my way around the outside and then the inside. Okay, there we go. Very happy with this simple project, but that looks really good. And again, if we're new to leather or sewing, what a great project to start with. We now have a gorgeous decoration for our kitchen that is highly useful. Now, here's a cool point. Say we want to give 1, 2, or maybe a set of 4 as a gift to a neighbor, friend, family, coworker. If we can figure out what the colors are in their kitchen, well, on the gift giving side, we are going to nail it. I hope every hot mat you make is spot on beautiful. Good luck with your projects.